I'm giving a shout out to some subscribers. Larry Cook, Edward, and Beanji. I see you, thanks for your support. It keeps this channel moving. God bless you always. The foundation had already pulled her name when Veda entered. Maris Halden, board face, event host, the woman who told Veda to wait in the car, was being redirected by her own husband toward a private room, while donors studied the hallway photographs with sudden, intense interest. Cedar and candle wax thick in the air, marble floor cold under flat shoes. The foyer speaker Maris never thought to check, still warm from every word it had carried inside. 18 months of documented staff complaints, 4 formal filings, 3 board meetings Maris refused to attend. None of it came from a rival, a journalist, or anyone with leverage to gain. It came from a maid, the same woman Maris had studied through a cracked door and dismissed in under 3 seconds. What Maris never calculated, Veda had been in a room with her before. I had a different address, an intake desk at a women's resource center on South Figueroa Street, where Maris once held a clipboard and made the same calculation about women who had nowhere else to go. Drop a comment where you're watching from and subscribe, because what Veda Holt carried onto that porch was not anger, it was memory. And memory, held long enough, is the one thing status cannot buy its way around. The image that nobody in that hallway would speak about honestly, not that night, not in the careful days that followed, was a simple one. A woman in a plain coat and flat shoes standing in the marble foyer of a Brentwood estate, while the woman who owned that foyer was being walked, quietly and without ceremony, to a private room by her own husband. No announcement, no raised voices, just the soft redirect of expensive heels away from the donors she had spent months curating. Away from the foundation whose name sat on a bronze plaque near the entrance, and toward a library where explanations would be required. The woman in the flat shoes did not watch her go with satisfaction. She watched with the steadiness of someone who had known for a while that this moment was coming and had simply held still long enough for it to arrive. 20 minutes before that image existed, she had been told to wait in the car. That was what Maris Halden said. Wait in the car. She held the front door on its latch rather than opening it, her fingers wrapped around the edge as if the house itself needed protection from whoever stood on the porch. The donor reception hummed behind the property, music lifting from the back terrace, valets moving in practiced lines along the curved driveway, the kind of event that costs more per table than most people earn in 3 months. The porch light pressed down flat on everything beneath it. The stone steps, the ornamental hedges trimmed to identical heights on both sides, and the 3 people who had arrived exactly when they were told to arrive. Darius Kincaid stood at the base of those steps with his 8-year-old daughter Elowen's hand locked in his left, and 3 months of professional patience compressed in his chest like a breath held past comfort. His firm had been waiting on a contract decision that this foundation controlled, a contract his team had earned through open bidding and documented results, and tonight, Tate Halden had agreed to close it. Darius had not come to make a scene. He had come to finish something that should have been finished before it became what it was now turning into. Standing 1 step ahead of him was Veda Holt. She worked in his home and had been doing so long enough to know the difference between a rule and a humiliation dressed as one. She wore a plain coat because she had dressed for the temperature, not for the occasion. And she had brought nothing with her that required proving. Maris studied her the way certain people study those they have already placed in a category. Slow, deliberate, the eyes moving without apology. And then she looked past Veda to Darius, and then back to Veda, as if the child beside him was scenery and Veda was the actual problem. The words that followed came without hesitation. Wrong door. Staff enters from the back. and then, with the particular ease of someone who had said this kind of thing enough times that it had stopped requiring effort. "If you're his maid, you wait in the car." Alawan's coat was buttoned wrong, one fastening off from the bottom, the whole line of it sitting slightly crooked against her small frame. She had done it herself that morning and refused every offer of correction, insisting it looked right to her. Darius had let it go without argument, the same quiet way his sister had once let things like that go with him when he was small, telling him that some things don't need straightening just because someone else finds them crooked. That same patience, learned from someone he no longer had, was the thing holding him still on the porch now, even as Maris's eyes moved across Veda with the temperature of a woman deciding how much force to apply. Veda did not step back. She held her position on the stone step and let Maris's words settle without chasing them. Above the door frame, almost flush with the molding, a small black speaker dome caught the porch light at a low angle, part of the estate's entry system, feeding directly into the foyer audio channel that ran the length of the main hallway inside. Veda had noticed it when they walked up. Maris, it was clear, had not considered it. Darius kept his voice controlled because Elowen was listening the way children listen when they sense the adults around them are performing something important, not grasping the full shape of it but storing the texture for later. He told Maris that her assistant had confirmed the front door, 6:30, and that Tate Halden had asked for a word before the program started. Maris said her assistant confirmed many things. Then she looked at Veda again, and this time the look had a specific heat to it, the kind designed to be felt rather than answered. "Subscribe, because silence at the wrong door costs more than most people ever realize." Veda let the look settle. Then she said, without raising her voice, that the entry speaker above the doorframe was active and running into the hallway. Maris's shoulders shifted, barely a fraction of movement, in the way a person moves when they suddenly understand that the room they believed was private has been listening the entire time. From somewhere deeper in the house, laughter thinned for a single second, then resumed, softer and less certain, the particular sound of a room deciding how much it had actually heard. Maris leaned into the gap of the door and dropped her voice. She told Veda that she did not get to issue corrections at someone else's entrance. Veda waited until she finished. Then she said something short and flat and completely without drama. One sentence, spoken at the same register as everything else she had said all evening, that made Maris Halden go absolutely still. Not the stillness of composure, the stillness of a person who has just heard a name they buried spoken out loud in a place it was never supposed to surface. Veda had called her something. The other name. The one that did not appear on the foundation invitations or the donor programs or the bronze plaque near the door. And she said it like she had known it for a long time and had simply been waiting for the right moment to use it carefully. Maris Halden did not immediately respond to the speaker warning. What she did instead was pull the door slightly closer to her body. A small instinctive movement, as if reducing the gap between her and the frame could reduce the gap between what she had said and whoever inside the house had heard it. The hallway audio system ran the full length of the main corridor toward the reception foyer, and the entry channel fed cleanly into it, a feature designed so that arriving guests could be heard from the interior before the door was opened. It had been installed for convenience. Tonight it was functioning as something else entirely. Maris understood this now, in the way a person understands something that cannot be undone, fully, and too late. She recovered quickly, the way people do when social survival has been practiced long enough to become reflex. Her eyes dropped to Elowen, and what followed was a performance so smooth it would have read as genuine to anyone who hadn't been watching her face 30 seconds earlier. Her voice softened. She acknowledged the child directly, asked her name with the warm, unhurried tone of someone who had spent years at fundraising tables performing approachability. So Elowen looked at her with the flat assessment of an 8-year-old who hasn't yet learned to pretend adults are more trustworthy than they seem, and said nothing. Darius kept his hand around his daughter's and did not fill the silence for her. Maris let the softness linger a moment longer, then let it drop, because the child hadn't responded the way the performance required, and performing to an unresponsive audience had never been Maris's preference. Her eyes returned to Veda. The warmth she had briefly assembled for Elowen was entirely absent now, replaced by the particular kind of controlled disdain that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. She told Veda that pointing out the speaker had been unnecessary, that guests of the house did not narrate its features to its owner, that there was a manner in which people in Veda's position were expected to conduct themselves at events like this, and that Veda had already exceeded it. She said this quietly, which made it land harder than volume would have, because quiet contempt does not give the person receiving it anything to push against. Darius kept his expression level. He was not keeping quiet because he lacked an answer. He was keeping quiet because the porch light was catching his daughter's face, and Elowen was watching him with the specific attention of a child deciding what it looks like when a man chooses not to break. It was at that point that the foyer light shifted, the inner door behind Maris pulling wider as footsteps crossed the marble from deeper in the house. The man who appeared in the gap was not Tate Halden. He was broader, slower moving, wearing a dark jacket with no tie, and the practiced, neutral expression of someone paid to read a room before entering it. Cal Renshaw had been head of security at the Halden estate for 4 years, long enough to know the geography of Maris's moods, and long enough to recognize when one of them had produced a situation she hadn't fully planned for. He took in the porch in a single pass, Darius's stillness, Elowen's silence, Veda's position, Maris's posture, and his expression did not change, but something behind it did. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood inside the threshold and waited, because a man in his position learns early that the most dangerous thing he can do is move, before he understands which direction is safe. Maris registered his presence without turning fully toward him. She kept her gaze forward, her chin level, or as if looking away from the porch would concede something she wasn't prepared to concede. Then she told him, in the same quiet register she had been using since the speaker warning, to remove Veda from the entrance. She did not say, "Please." She did not explain. She gave the instruction the way she gave most instructions, with the assumption that the space between her mouth and the outcome would be filled by someone else's compliance. Cal Renshaw did not move. He stood exactly where he had been standing when she spoke, his weight settled, his hands at his sides, and looked at Veda with an expression that was not defiance and not apology. It was the specific stillness of someone who had received a separate instruction before this one, from a different direction, and was now measuring the distance between the two. The porch held the silence. Maris's jaw tightened by a fraction, and Veda watched Cal the way she had watched everything since arriving, without urgency, without performance, with the patience of a person who understood that the next few seconds were going to say something that no one on that porch had said out loud yet. The silence that followed Cal Renshaw's refusal to move lasted only a few seconds, but it had weight to it. The specific weight of an instruction that has been given and publicly ignored, which is a different kind of failure than one that happens in private. Maris felt it. Her chin lifted by a fraction, the small involuntary adjustment of a person whose authority has just been tested in front of an audience, even a small one. She turned back to the porch with a new quality in her expression, something past disdain now, closer to decision. And she opened the door another several inches, letting the foyer light spill wide across the stone steps. The movement was deliberate. She was making the porch a stage, broadening the scene so that anyone passing through the hallway behind her would have a clear view of what she was doing and to whom she was doing it. She had spent enough years at events like this one to understand that witnesses, positioned correctly, become a form of pressure. She looked at Veda and spoke loud enough that the hallway behind her would carry it. She said that Veda did not belong at this entrance, on that whatever arrangement existed between Veda and Darius was a private domestic matter that had no place at a foundation event attended by people who had given real money to real causes. She let the word domestic sit in the air the way certain people deploy words, not to describe, but to diminish. Then she added, with the particular cruelty of someone who has learned to perform concern while inflicting damage, that she hoped Elowen understood the difference between the kind of people who built things and the kind of people who were brought along. She looked at the child when she said it. That was the part that crossed something in the room, not just in Darius, whose jaw had gone tight in a way that suggested discipline was costing him more than it had cost him at any point that evening, but in Cal, who shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, and in the two donors visible at the edge of the hallway who had stopped pretending to examine the framed photographs on the wall and were now simply watching. Veda's response did not come immediately. She let a full breath pass, unhurried, deliberate, the breath of someone choosing their ground rather than reacting from it. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the elevation the moment seemed to demand. It was level, almost quiet, the kind of voice that makes people lean in rather than step back, because the stillness in it suggests that whatever is about to be said does not need volume to land. She said one sentence. It named Maris by the name that was not on the foundation invitations. It named a specific room, Intake Room 2 at the Safe Harbor Women's Resource Center on South Figueroa Street in Los Angeles, and it noted, plainly, that Maris had spoken to people there the same way she was speaking now, and that the people there had no door to close against it. Maris Halden's face did not collapse. It went still, which was worse, the stillness of a person who has been hit in a place they believed was buried deep enough to be untouchable, and who needs a moment to determine whether denial is still available to them. Her throat moved once. Her fingers, wrapped around the edge of the door, pressed slightly harder against the wood. A small contraction, the body registering something the face was working to conceal. The foyer light kept falling across the porch without adjustment, indifferent to what had just shifted beneath it. Darius registered the change in Maris's posture before he fully processed the words, because something in the quality of her stillness told him that Veda had reached something real. Elowen sensed it the way children sense the pressure drop before weather changes. She moved closer to her father's side without being asked, her small fingers tightening around his, her eyes fixed on Maris's face with the unguarded attention of someone who hasn't yet learned that staring at adults in distress is impolite. Subscribe before the next twist catches you completely off guard. Inside the house, the reception continued. Music, movement, the low percussion of a room full of people performing ease, but the hallway had gone quieter than it should have been. The two donors near the photographs had not moved. Whatever they had heard enough of it to understand that stepping away now would be its own kind of statement. Maris's eyes stayed on Veda, and the contempt that had been in them since the door first opened had developed a new texture. Fear threading through it, not replacing it but changing the shape of it. The way water changes the shape of soil, it moves through long enough. Maris's voice came out lower than before, stripped of the performance quality it had carried all evening. She asked Veda who she really was, not the question of someone curious, the question of someone trying to locate the size of the problem standing in front of them. Veda's answer was brief and grounded, and carried the particular quality of someone who has been waiting a long time to say something true in a place where the truth has consequences. She told Maris that she was someone who remembered what Maris did in that room, and someone who remembered the women who had sat across the intake desk from her and left with less than they arrived with, because the person holding the clipboard had decided, before they spoke a single word, exactly how much help they deserved. Tate Halden did not arrive at the door the way men arrive when they are trying to rescue a situation. He arrived the way men arrive when they have already decided what is going to happen and are simply completing the final step of a sequence that began without anyone on the porch knowing it had started. His footsteps were unhurried across the marble foyer, dress shoes on stone, the sound carrying cleanly through the open door gap. and when he appeared behind Maris, he was still buttoning the lower button of his jacket with the calm efficiency of someone who had taken a moment to compose himself. Not because he was nervous, but because he understood that the way a man enters a room tells everyone in it something before he opens his mouth. He was taller than the door framing seemed to expect. His eyes moved across the porch in a single pass and returned to Maris, and whatever he saw in her posture confirmed something he had already suspected, because his expression did not shift into surprise. It settled into a particular kind of quiet that in a man of his position functions as a verdict. He said 2 words: "Let them in." He said it without elevation, without the performance of authority, in the tone of someone accustomed to instructions that do not require repetition. Maris turned toward him with the beginnings of an objection already forming. Her chin up, her shoulders pulled back, the full physical grammar of a woman who considers her position at that threshold to be a legitimate one. Tate looked at her without moving toward her, and the look held something she had not expected from him tonight. Not anger, not embarrassment on her behalf, but a finished patience, the expression of someone who has extended a private grace period that has now, without announcement, expired. Maris's objection did not complete itself. She stepped back from the door. Not with grace, but she stepped back. Darius moved Elowin forward ahead of him and crossed the threshold with the measured step of a man who has just spent 20 minutes being told he did not belong somewhere and is now choosing to enter it without proving anything to anyone. Veda followed, her flat shoes quiet against the marble, her posture unchanged from the moment she had arrived, no adjustment for the interior, no softening toward the warmth and candlelight and the faint smell of cedar and fresh flowers that the foyer carried. She had not needed to perform composure on the porch. She did not need to perform comfort now. She simply moved into the house the way she moved through most things, with the economy of someone who has learned not to waste motion on spaces that have not yet decided whether to welcome her. The hallway extended from the foyer toward the reception rooms at the back of the estate, and along its left wall hung a series of framed photographs, foundation events, ribbon cuttings, the careful visual record of philanthropy made visible. 3 donors stood near the far end of that hallway, drinks in hand, positioned at that particular angle that allows a person to face away from something while remaining entirely aware of it. They did not turn when Darius and Elwyn entered. They did not need to. The slight adjustment in the nearest man's shoulders, the way the woman beside him brought her glass to her lips without drinking from it, the careful stillness of the third. These were the tells of people absorbing information they had decided, in advance, not to acknowledge. So the Brentwood donor circuit had its own grammar of selective attention, and everyone in that hallway was fluent in it. Tate directed the group toward the library at the end of the south corridor, a room set apart from the reception, its door heavy enough to hold sound on both sides. Maris followed because not following would have required a confrontation she was not yet equipped to have, and because whatever Tate was managing tonight, he was managing it with the composed certainty of a man who had already thought past her objections. The library door closed behind them with the soft, pressurized click of a well-fitted frame, and the reception hum beyond it dropped to something barely present. A low warmth in the walls, the suggestion of a party continuing without them. Darius looked at Tate and said what he had come to say plainly, that he was there about the contract, that his company had met every condition of the bid, and that he had been patient with a timeline that had stretched past every reasonable explanation. Tate listened without interrupting. When Darius finished, Tate was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone formulating a response, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the actual problem to put on the table. Then he told Darius that the contract was not what they were there to talk about. Not yet. That there was something underneath it that needed to be said first, and that what had happened at the front door tonight was not separate from it. It was the same thing, surfacing in the most visible way possible. The library held the kind of silence that expensive rooms manufacture, thick rugs pulling sound from the floor, heavy shelves absorbing it from the walls, the faint smell of aged paper and leather, and something beneath both of those that was closer to cedar and sealed air, the whole space engineered to make conversations feel contained and private, even when the people inside them are anything but. The room ran warm from being closed most of the evening, and the warmth had a pressed, close quality to it. The kind that makes a person aware of their own breathing without being able to say exactly when that awareness began. Darius sat at the edge of the leather chair nearest the door. Not settled into it, just using its edge the way a man uses a surface when he isn't sure how long he intends to stay. Saelowen had taken the seat beside him without being directed to, and within 2 minutes of the library door closing, she had reached sideways toward the low shelf to her right and pulled a book from it, a wide, hardcover volume with a dark spine that she held in both hands across her lap, not reading it, not opening it, simply holding it the way children hold objects when adults are speaking in a frequency they can feel but not fully translate. Maris stood near the door with her arms folded across her chest, and her eyes moving between Tate and Darius with the restless attention of someone trying to locate the edge of the problem before it locates them. Darius laid out what he had come to say without decoration. Over the preceding 3 months, your 2 donors who had verbally committed to co-funding his firm's community development contract had quietly withdrawn. No formal explanation, just a cooling of correspondence that ended in silence. A third contact, a board-adjacent attorney who had been friendly enough to recommend Darius's firm directly to the foundation, had stopped returning calls after a single lunch that Darius later learned Maris had attended. The contract itself had not been canceled. It had simply been left in a state of unresolved review, a condition that cost Darius's small firm real money in held resources and turned down alternative work, while the foundation continued to benefit from the preliminary work his team had already submitted. He was not accusing anyone of anything criminal. He was describing a pattern with a shape, and the shape had a consistency that was difficult to explain as coincidence. Tate listened to all of it without interrupting, his posture unchanged, his hands loose at his sides. When Darius finished, Tate did not argue with the pattern or suggest alternative explanations. He acknowledged it with the directness of a man who had already done his own accounting of the situation and arrived at similar conclusions by a different route. He told Darius that the donor withdrawals had not been accidental and that the lunch with the board-adjacent attorney had not been. He said this without looking at Maris, which made the implication land harder than an accusation pointed directly at her would have. Maris's arms tightened across her chest. She said Tate was simplifying something complicated. Tate did not respond to that. What Tate said instead was that the pattern Darius had described was consistent with how Maris operated when she felt a threat approaching something she wanted, kept separate. That she did not confront directly, she redirected. She managed perception through third parties. She used the foundation's social architecture the way a person uses furniture to reroute foot traffic through a room. He said this clinically, without venom, in the tone of someone describing a recurring weather pattern rather than a personal failing, which made it worse for Maris because it removed the possibility of framing his words as an attack. He was not angry. He was accurate, and accuracy without anger is a harder thing to defend against. Darius turned the information over slowly. What had felt like professional friction, the kind of low-grade institutional resistance that Black business owners learned to navigate as a condition of operating in certain circles, was beginning to take a more specific shape. This was not the ambient difficulty of a system not designed for him. This was a directed pressure with a source, and the source was standing 12 feet away with her arms folded, recalculating. He looked at Veda because Veda had been in the room through all of it and had said nothing, and the quality of her silence had a different texture than the silence of someone who had nothing to contribute. It had the texture of someone holding something back because the right moment to set it down had not yet arrived. Tate turned toward Veda with the deliberate movement of a man closing the last distance between a problem and its full explanation. He told her to tell Darius the real reason Maris had recognized her. Not the door, not the foundation. The reason underneath both of those things, the one that explained why a woman with Maris's resources and social position had spent months quietly engineering the professional isolation of a single father whose firm was smaller than her event budget, and why she had done it through the people closest to him, rather than through any channel that could be traced back to her directly. Veda looked at Tate for a moment. Then she looked at Darius. The book in Alohan's lap had not moved. The room held its breath in the particular way rooms do when the next sentence is going to change the shape of everything that came before it. And everyone present understands this except the child, who simply tightens her grip on the spine of a book she will never read and watches her father's face for the signal that tells her whether to be afraid. Veda began with the part that was easiest to say, because it was the part that required the least from Darius. The part about Maris and Safe Harbor, about what kind of power looks like when it is given to a person who does not believe the people beneath them are fully real. She had been a volunteer coordinator at the center for nearly 2 years before she transitioned out, long enough to observe the intake process across multiple staff rotations, for long enough to see which volunteers carried their position lightly and which ones carried it like a credential. Maris, under the name she had used then, the one Veda had said at the door, had been the latter. She had not been cruel in the obvious ways that leave records. She had been cruel in the ways that are harder to name. The extra questions asked of women who already looked exhausted. The paperwork redirected when an applicant's manner didn't match some internal standard of deserving. The particular warmth she reserved for cases that photographed well, and the particular efficiency she applied to cases that did not. She had done it with the confidence of someone who believed her judgment was the same thing as fairness, and that confidence was the most dangerous part of it, because it meant she never needed to acknowledge what she was doing. Tate had moved to the window on the south wall while Veda spoke, not to look out of it, but in the way people move to the edges of rooms when the center of a conversation becomes too concentrated, giving it space to expand without crowding it. The garden beyond the glass was dark and still, the exterior pathway lights casting low amber pools across the stone below, and the faint percussion of the reception, a bass note from the outdoor speakers, the compressed murmur of a room full of people choosing ease, pressed faintly through the double-glazed pane. Standing there, Tate's reflection was barely visible against the dark, a ghost outline in a jacket, present without being central. Maurice said that Veda was describing a version of events shaped by a specific perspective, and that the work at Safe Harbor had been genuinely difficult, that decisions made under resource pressure looked different from the outside, that she had given real time to that place, and did not deserve to have it turned into evidence against her. The words came out in the clipped, pressured cadence of someone constructing a defense in real time, and aware that it is not quite holding together. Veda did not argue with any of it. She simply waited for Maris to finish and then continued, because the defense Maris was assembling was aimed at the wrong part of the problem. It addressed intent, and intent was not what Veda was talking about. She was talking about pattern. She was talking about the way the same instinct that had operated behind an intake desk in a women's resource center on South Figueroa Street had shown up again tonight on a Brentwood porch, wearing different clothes and a different name, but making the same calculation, that this person, based on how they presented, did not require full consideration. Darius had been quiet through Veda's account with the controlled stillness of a man processing something that was rearranging his understanding of the last 3 months. Then Tate turned from the window, slowly, with the deliberate movement of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to complete a thought, and said the sentence that changed the temperature of the room entirely. He told Darius that Maris had first encountered his family name not through the foundation, not through the contract bidding process, but through a document she had come across months earlier, a donor acknowledgement from a community fundraiser at Alohan's school that listed legacy dedications. Darius's contribution had been made in his late sister's name, and his sister's name, attached to Safe Harbor in the dedication, had been one Maris recognized from the intake records she had processed years before she became someone who threw events in Brentwood. Darius stood up, Not aggressively, he simply could not remain seated, the way a person cannot remain seated when something lands in them at a depth that sitting down no longer fits. His sister had sought help at that center during a period of her life that had cost her everything and then cost her more, and she had encountered the version of Maris that existed before the monogrammed napkins and the bronze plaques, the version with a clipboard and a judgment she mistook for discernment. He stood with his hand resting on the back of the chair and looked at Maris with an expression that held no theater in it, just the full, quiet weight of a man understanding for the first time that the obstruction he had been navigating professionally had a personal root, and that the route went somewhere he had not agreed to take it. Maris's voice, when it came, was lower than it had been all evening. She said she had recognized the name and panicked, and that panicking was not the same as acting with malice. Veda's response was brief. She said that the women who had sat across the intake desk from Maris at Safe Harbor had not been able to afford the difference between the two. The room went still around that sentence the way rooms go still around something that cannot be unsaid and does not need to be repeated. Then, from the other side of the heavy library door, came 2 knocks, measured, deliberate, with a single knock following after a pause, the kind of knock that does not ask permission so much as announce that what comes next has already been decided. Tate crossed to the library door and opened it without hesitation. The movement of a man who had been expecting those knocks and had been waiting for them with the particular patience of someone who understands that certain conversations cannot be completed without witnesses. Cool air from the corridor moved briefly into the room when the door swung open, carrying with it the distant warmth of the reception. Candle wax, something floral, the low brass note of live music that had been running for 2 hours and had settled into its comfortable register. The 2 people who entered did not rush. They moved into the library the way people move when they hold genuine authority, without performing it, without announcing it, simply carrying it in the unhurried quality of their steps and the way their eyes went immediately and without apology to Maris. Blaine Ormsby was the Foundation's board chair, a man in his early 60s whose face had the composed, slightly worn quality of someone who had sat through enough difficult rooms to have stopped finding them dramatic. Beside him was Giselle Park, the Foundation's operations director, whose expression carried something harder to name than neutrality. It was the specific tiredness of a person who has documented a problem carefully and thoroughly and has been waiting with diminishing patience for the moment when documentation becomes action. She held a manila envelope at her side with the relaxed grip of someone who has been holding it long enough that it no longer feels significant, even though everything inside it is. Aloan, who had been still in her chair since the knock, watched the 2 new adults enter and then, without being told to, set her book down on the arm of the chair and moved quietly closer to Veda, not grabbing, not frightened, by simply repositioning the way children reposition when a room's geometry shifts and instinct tells them to find the person who has felt most constant. Veda did not reach for her or make a production of the movement. She simply remained where she was and let the child settle beside her, and the 2 of them stood together near the south wall with the quality of people who have learned to take up exactly the space they need and not apologize for it. Blaine's eyes moved across Darius briefly, an acknowledgement without warmth, the nod of a man who recognizes he is not the reason for this person's presence, but owes him the basic respect of registering it. Then his attention returned to Maris and stayed there. He told her that the board had attempted to arrange a private meeting on 3 separate occasions over the preceding 6 weeks, and that each attempt had been declined or redirected through her assistant with an explanation that cited scheduling. He said this without accusation, in the tone of someone reciting established facts that have already been agreed upon, which made it more damaging than an argument would have been because it offered Mary nothing to push against. The 3 declined meetings were not contested. They had happened. The record of them existed in correspondence that Giselle's envelope almost certainly contained. Maris's posture shifted toward Tate with the instinct of someone reaching for the nearest stable surface. She told him this was not what they had discussed, that whatever he had told the board, he had misrepresented her, that bringing Blaine and Giselle into the library during a foundation event without warning her first was a form of ambush, and that she deserved the same private consideration she had been extending to the board's concerns for months. Tate's response was brief. He told her that tonight had made privacy unavailable, and that she understood why. He did not glance toward the door, toward the hallway audio system, toward the donors who had been standing near those framed photographs. He did not need to. The reference was understood by everyone in the room, including Maris. Subscribe, before silence costs someone in your life more than you know. Giselle spoke for the first time since entering, and the quality of her voice was what distinguished it from everything else said in that library. It carried no personal heat, no satisfaction, no residue of conflict. It was the voice of someone reading from an internal record that had been accumulating for a long time and had finally reached the weight required to justify being read aloud. She said that the foundation staff had submitted concerns about Maris's conduct on 4 separate occasions over 18 months. She said these were not informal complaints passed through gossip or personal grievance. They were documented instances submitted through the Foundation's internal review process describing a pattern of treatment toward contracted staff, external vendors, and support personnel that had created an environment of managed fear in the spaces Maris occupied regularly. She said the word fear, without drama, as a clinical descriptor, and its plainness made it heavier than any charged synonym would have been. Maris's throat moved. Her eyes went to the envelope in Giselle's hand with the specific attention of someone trying to determine the dimensions of something that is about to land on them. Blaine reached into his jacket and produced a second, smaller envelope, sealed with the Foundation's letterhead visible at the top edge, and set it on the desk between them without ceremony. He told Maris that effective immediately she was being asked to step back from all Foundation-facing roles, including donor relations, public programming, and event representation, pending a formal review process whose timeline the board would communicate in writing within 5 business days. He said it the way professionals say things that cannot be unsaid, plainly, completely, with no softening clause at the end that might suggest negotiation was still available. Maris stared at the envelope on the desk. Her hand moved toward it and then stopped, because picking it up meant accepting that it was real, and for a moment she was a woman suspended between 2 versions of the night, the one she had planned, where she controlled the room, and the one she was standing inside, where the room had already made its decision without her. She looked at Veda, and the look was no longer the measured contempt of a woman certain of her position. It was the unguarded exposure of someone realizing, too late and too publicly, that the person she had tried hardest to diminish had been the one person in the building who already knew exactly how this would end. The envelope stayed on the desk. Nobody moved toward it. The library held a particular quality of silence in that stretch of seconds. Not the silence of a room waiting for something to happen, but the silence of a room in which something already has happened, and the people inside it are each privately deciding what it means for them going forward. The air had grown heavier since Blaine and Giselle entered, the warmth of the sealed room pressing more noticeably now, and somewhere beyond the south wall the reception music had shifted to something slower, the change in tempo filtering through stone and insulation as little more than a vibration beneath the conversation, but present, the way the outside world remains present even when a room has done everything it can to keep it out. Blaine stood near the desk with his hands loose at his sides, so having said what he came to say and showing no inclination to add to it. Giselle had positioned herself slightly to his left, her own envelope still in hand, her eyes moving occasionally to Darius and then to Elowen, with the quiet assessment of someone cataloging the full cost of what she had been documenting for 18 months. Not just the staff who had filed concerns, but the people drawn into the radius of a pattern they had no hand in creating. Maris moved, not toward the desk and not toward Tate. She stepped sideways along the wall toward the library door, a drift rather than a deliberate walk, the territorial reflex of a person whose space has contracted around them. and who was trying to recover some sense of position without appearing to retreat. She stopped near the doorframe with her back partially to the room, her chin up, and when she turned back around, the expression on her face had made one final attempt to reassemble itself into something that resembled authority. She looked at Veda and said it plainly, with the flatness of someone deploying a weapon they have used successfully enough times that they reach for it without thinking, even when the conditions have changed. She called Veda a maid, not as a description, as a verdict, as the word she believed at the bottom of everything was still the one that decided the weight of a person's opinion in a room like this one. The word landed differently than it had at the front door. At the door, it had carried the full force of unchallenged position behind it. Maris on her own threshold, donors inside, security nearby, the architecture of wealth arranged in her favor. Here, in the library, with Blaine Ormsby holding an envelope of documented staff complaints and Giselle Park standing 3 feet away with the patient expression of a woman who had heard enough to form a conclusion, the word arrived without the infrastructure that had always given it power. It was a stone thrown in a room that had already flooded. Blaine's expression did not change, but his eyes moved to Maris with a quality of attention that was the opposite of neutral. It was the attention of a man updating his assessment in real time and not finding the update favorable. Veda's response was single and unhurried. She told Maris that she was right. She did work in a home, and she did it with more care than Maris had brought to any of the rooms she had occupied that evening. Then she said nothing further, because nothing further was needed. The brevity of it was the answer. A person who needed to defend their worth at length was a person who had been made to doubt it. Veda had no such doubt, and the room understood this without being told. Tate picked up his phone from the desk where he had set it when the library meeting began and typed something brief, 2 lines at most, then set it down again. Within 30 seconds, a soft knock came from outside, different from Blaine and Giselle's arrival knock, and Cal Renshaw's voice came through the door confirming that the evening program had been adjusted. The remarks previously scheduled for Maris at the donor address portion of the event had been removed from the agenda. The replacement presenter was already briefed. The adjustment had been communicated to the event coordinator as a scheduling change. None of this was announced to the room as a punishment. It was simply described as a logistical fact, which made it more complete than a punishment would have been, because a punishment can be contested and a logistical fact simply exists. Darius had been watching his daughter through the last several minutes with the divided attention of a father who is managing something adult while simultaneously tracking a child's interior weather. Alawan had been still since moving close to Veda, not distressed, not acting out, simply absorbing the room with the unfiltered receptivity of a child too young to have learned selective attention. She looked at her father now with clear, direct eyes and asked him, in the uncomplicated register of someone who has not yet learned that certain questions are inconvenient, whether the lady near the door was sad because she had been mean and it had not worked. The question fell into the room like a coin into still water, the ripple of it reaching every adult present before any of them had decided how to respond. Darius crouched to his daughter's level and held her gaze for a moment, long enough that the choice he made next was clearly a choice and not a reflex. He told her that was probably close to right. Then he looked up at Veda, and the look between them carried the shorthand of 2 people who have been through enough together to communicate without completing sentences. And what passed between them in that look was a question and its answer. Was there anything left here worth staying for, or had everything that needed to happen already happened? Darius did not announce that he was leaving. He did not offer a speech or a summation or a final word designed to land with the weight of everything that had happened in that room. He stood from his crouch, took Elowen's hand and looked at Tate with the even, unperformed directness of a man who has decided that the most dignified exit is also the most honest one. He told Tate that his firm's contract should be decided on the merits of the work submitted. the same standard he had asked for from the beginning, and that he was not interested in having it restored as a gesture of compensation for what happened at the door. He said this without bitterness and without gratitude, in the tone of someone who understands that accepting a correction as a favor is its own kind of diminishment, that his work had earned a fair evaluation, not a sympathetic one, and that the difference between those two things was the only thing he had ever actually been asking for. Tate nodded once. The nod held no performance in it. It was the acknowledgement of a man who had just been reminded, in plain language, of a standard he had let slide and understood he owed it to himself as much as anyone to restore. Giselle spoke before they reached the door. Her voice carried the same clinical steadiness it had held since she entered, but the words she chose were different now. Less report, more record. She told Darius that the foundation had a responsibility to the people who worked within its reach, contracted or otherwise, and that the complaints filed over the preceding 18 months had described an environment in which a person's title determined how much consideration their discomfort deserved. She said this looking at Darius, but meaning it for the room, for Blaine, for Tate, and most specifically for Maris, who was still standing near the doorframe with the posture of someone who has not yet decided whether to stay or go, because both options carry a cost she is not prepared to pay. Giselle's words were not comfort and were not intended to be. They were the institutional version of what Veda had said plainly from the beginning, that how you treat the people you believe cannot affect you is a more accurate measure of your character than how you treat the people who can. Veda guided Aloan gently toward the door with the light, practiced assurance of someone who has been keeping a child emotionally steady through adult turbulence all evening, not dramatizing the exit, not hurrying it, nor simply moving with the calm efficiency of a person whose job has always been to make sure that the child in her care ends the night feeling safe, regardless of what the adults around her have spent the evening becoming. Aloan walked beside her without resistance, her hand loose in Veda's, her eyes moving one final time around the library with the unhurried curiosity of a child who has stored the shape of a room she does not fully understand yet, and will return to in her memory at some later age when she has the language to name what she witnessed. Maris made her move at the threshold. It was not the aggressive repositioning of the woman who had held the front door on its latch 2 hours earlier. It was smaller than that, and the smallness of it was its own kind of revelation. She stepped slightly into the doorway as the three of them approached, not blocking, but present, in the way a person stands when they want to be acknowledged before something ends. She looked at Veda and said that she had not known about the connection to Darius's sister when she started managing the donor relationships, that by the time she understood the full picture, the situation had already developed momentum she could not easily stop, and that she was aware none of that was sufficient. But she wanted it said. The words had the careful construction of something rehearsed in the seconds available, shaped to sound like honesty, while still preserving the possibility of a less unflattering interpretation. It was not a lie, exactly, but it was not the full truth either. And Veda had spent enough time in rooms with people choosing between those two things to know the difference by the texture of the silence that followed. Veda stopped in the doorway and looked at Maris with the same steadiness she had carried from the porch to the foyer to the library, undiminished, unperformed. The composure of a person whose sense of herself had never actually been available for Maris to touch, regardless of how many times Maris had reached for it. She told Maris that if the acknowledgement was real, the place to put it was not in a doorway at the end of a difficult evening directed at the person she had harmed. The place to put it was in how she moved through the next room, and the room after that, and every intake desk and donor table and front door she stood at going forward. She said this without cruelty and without clemency. It was not forgiveness and it was not punishment. It was a standard delivered plainly by someone who had earned the right to set it. Then she moved past Maris into the corridor, and Darius followed, and Eloan's small steps fell in between them, unhurried, steady, carrying the easy confidence of a child who has spent the evening watching the adults she trusts refuse to become less than themselves. The corridor from the library to the front foyer was not long. but it passed the full length of the hallway where the donor photographs hung, and the three of them walked it without slowing. The reception behind the house had continued through the evening without interruption. Music, movement, the warm, indifferent hum of a gathering that had no interest in the specific gravity of what had been happening 40 feet away in a closed room. A few guests visible near the hallway entrance registered their passage, the way people register something they have decided in advance not to engage with. A slight reorientation. A conversation resumed a beat too quickly. The careful management of eye contact that functions as its own form of response. Darius did not read their avoidance as hostility and did not read it as support. He read it as the ordinary behavior of people choosing the path that costs them least, which is a choice he understood without condoning it, because he had seen what it produced, and he had spent the evening watching what the alternative looked like. Outside, the Brentwood air carried the particular coolness of a late evening in late autumn in Los Angeles, dry and clean, with the faint scent of eucalyptus from the properties bordering the estate's north hedge line. The valet stand was still active, 3 attendants moving in the practiced rotation of people managing an event that had not yet reached its natural end. The driveway lights were the same as when they arrived, bright even, pressing everything beneath them into sharp relief. Darius walked to where he had parked without requesting assistance and unlocked the car himself, and Elwyn climbed into the back seat with the unself-conscious ease of a child returning to familiar ground after a long time in uncertain territory. He stood outside the driver's door for a moment before getting in, not looking back at the house, just standing in the temperature with the stillness of someone letting an evening settle into its actual shape before moving away from it. Veda stood a few feet to his right. He looked at her and said what he had been holding since the library, that he had known she was steady, but he had not known what steady cost, and that tonight had made the difference between those two things visible to him in a way it had not been before. He told her that his daughter had watched her all evening and that what Elwyn had seen was not a performance of composure, but the real thing, and that there was no version of the night that didn't include her and no version of raising his daughter that didn't include the kind of example Veda had set without once deciding to set it. He was not making a speech. He was saying a true thing plainly, the way people say true things when they are tired enough that ornament has fallen away and only the actual meaning is left. Veda received it without deflecting and without expanding it into more than it was. She told him that the work was the work, and that she did not need a room full of wealthy people to confirm the value of it. She had known what it was worth on the mornings it began and on the evenings it ended, and no door, however large, had ever had the authority to change that. Then she looked at him directly and said the last thing she said that night, quietly enough that it was clearly not for any audience. Shh. That the hardest thing about being underestimated is not the person doing it. It is the moment when you feel yourself beginning to agree with them. And the most important thing any person can do in that moment is notice it and refuse. Elwyn's voice came from the back seat through the cracked window, asking her father if they were going to sit in the driveway or go home. Darius's face shifted the way it had not shifted once during the entire evening, into something uncalculated and unheld, briefly and entirely his own. He got in the car. The headlights came on. The gate at the property's entrance opened on a sensor as they approached, and the car passed through it and onto the quiet Brentwood street, and the gate closed again behind them with the mechanical finality of a thing returning to its default position. The money and the lights and the foundation name on the bronze plaque stayed on the other side of it. What left with them was smaller than all of that and heavier than any of it. The intact sense of a person who had been told in several languages and from several directions that they were less than they were and had simply declined to become it. If you are the kind of person who has ever felt the weight of a room deciding your worth before you opened your mouth, this story is yours too. And the next time you feel that weight, remember what refusing looks like. It does not look like war. It looks like Veda Holt on a porch in Brentwood, standing exactly where she was told to stand, in flat shoes, in the cold, utterly unmoved. Subscribe, because the people who stay quiet when it matters are the ones who make this possible.